So we had the results on Tuesday night, and I wanted to give it a few days so that we were all ready to talk about it. And I don't do this often, but I wanted to do it this year because the playoff committee has 12 teams, the next two out, and I do it usually when it was the 4-team deal. So we're kind of like the halfway point of the NFL season. Let's look at finding the best 12 teams if we were going to apply the same kinds of standards to college football teams for NFL teams and put them in the playoffs. So slightly different. So there's a few things that you have to remove from the comparison. They're going to have some teams with some losses here. It's not just going to be about record the way it still is for a lot of the college football rankings. By record, if you look at every team right now, there are 18 teams that are 4-4 or worse. All right. So the top 12 teams actually would be covered by 3 or less losses. And then you have Arizona and Denver at 5-4. And then you have my favorite team, the Cincinnati Bengals, that lose again last night, who are 4-6. I did not get Cincinnati in the playoff despite their losses, other than the New England thing, which feels like outer space because you're like, what the hell is going on there? Kansas City, Washington, Baltimore overtime, Philadelphia, Baltimore again. Some nice losses in there. Some really nice losses. And I think they're a really good football team. Burrow's just been on a tear here again. I don't know if TV shows are still doing What's Wrong with Burrow after a loss the way that we do with quarterbacks, or why is a quarterback really good after a win when the quarterback wasn't really that good. But Lamar looks like the MVP. Cincinnati gets down in the field, gets the touchdown, tries to go for 2. I feel like I'm a big opponent or a big proponent of not going for 2 in big spots. But in this case, when you're the lesser team and you really kind of need it, and it's the division, I don't have a huge issue with it. And look, the last play just didn't work out. Like, Baltimore was ready for it. They covered the routes really well. I know people think that there was interference on the inside guy, but I don't know, whatever. It's not where the ball was thrown, and just wasn't going to matter all that much. So Baltimore gets another win. And I've seen, I don't know if it was ESPN or even if we're doing it here on The Ringer, because I know we do quarterback rankings like every single week, which, look, we can sit there and say, what's the point of any of it? I could say that about my entire career. All right. So the reason we do the quarterback stuff, whether it's us or someone else, it's just kind of fun. But I do think there should be some standard with Mahomes, as great as Lamar has been this year, and Lamar has been the better quarterback. I just think it should be Mahomes 1, and then you figure out what you want to do with the rest of the guys. Because I did see some kind of discussion of should you still put Mahomes at top 5? I think it should be Mahomes 1, and then you can start talking about it. And in that case, it'd be Lamar 2, even though, again, if you want to change what the conversation is, Lamar has played better quarterback this year than Mahomes has. And Baltimore, even with their 3 losses, as we segue into this, even with their 3 losses, I'm going to have them higher in my playoff rankings because of the opponents, because of the resume and all that kind of stuff. So let's dig through it. All right. So these rules are basically mine. I'm going through the best wins, the worst losses, and all that kind of stuff. We'll go through the best records that I have here, and then I'll put them in my 12-team playoff system. All right. Kansas City's 8-0, but they're 8th in point differential. Some of the strength of schedule stuff is all over the place, but theirs has not been great. Their best win is week 1 against Baltimore. That's probably because I like Baltimore so much. I think you should too. I think at 49ers is still a nice win. They've got the win at Cincinnati, and again, they haven't lost. They have 6 one-score wins. If you wanted to be a little difficult about it, Detroit is 7-1. They're number 1 in point differential. Their best wins at Minnesota when Minnesota was undefeated, 31-29. At Green Bay is a good win. At Arizona, I think, is a good win. Destroying Dallas. When you beat a team in the NFL 47-9 with Dallas' talent. So that's some nice stuff there on the resume. The worst loss, it's their only loss, it's Tampa Bay. Remember, they were 1 for 7 in the red zone on that one. So Detroit in the conversation for the number 1 overall seed. Buffalo is at 7-2. Their best win is Arizona, maybe. At Seattle, you could say their losses are actually pretty good, but they did get housed by Baltimore. And they lost in the fourth quarter at Houston after being down early. They tied it up 20 apiece there. They're number 2 in point differential. Promise I won't do point differential for every single team here. Washington 7-2. Best wins at Cincinnati, kind of the Jane Daniels coming out party. The week 1 loss at Tampa isn't terrible. And then losing to Baltimore by 1 score is a good loss. Pittsburgh at 6-2. Best win week 2 at Denver, 13-6. At home against the Chargers, 20-10. I think it's probably the Chargers. Worst loss at the Colts by a field goal. Dallas by a field goal. But it's only 2 losses. So I'd be kind of curious where Pittsburgh is in comparison to maybe some teams that have worse records. Minnesota at 6-2. Got off to the amazing start. Everybody loved it. The Darnold Reclamation Project. On top of that, Flores and defense just finding ways every single week to disrupt everything. They've got a Houston win that was dominant, 34-7. The Niners win. I'm going to bring up Niners results because I just respect them. I don't know, whatever, respect the shield. At Green Bay with Jordan Love, the losses, Lions, Rams, and it just feels like with Minnesota, it's slipping a bit because of a 1-score game against the Colts. All right, Philadelphia, 6-2, week 1 win against Green Bay. That was a nice win. It was a good game. Felt like it was 2 really good football teams that night. At Cincy 2 weeks ago, 37-17, turning on in the second half. There's a reason why I talked up that win. I thought it was the best win of the week, despite Cincinnati's record here. Worst loss is, these aren't bad losses necessarily to lose by a point to Atlanta. The 33-16 loss earlier in the year against Tampa was the one where people were ready to say, hey, this Philly thing. Remember when I did the Bucs segment of, like, you don't really know when a team dies until years later, as opposed to a person. You're like, that guy died. He died on August 14th. It felt like maybe we were going to start leaning into that with Philadelphia a little bit. And no, that's not really the case. So I think we're okay with that. I feel a lot better about Philadelphia than I did a month or so ago. Baltimore, record-wise, behind all of these teams. What are we going to do? Are they going to be this low in the ranking? No. Wins against the Bills, Cincinnati twice, Denver, because of the record. Is that a good win? Well, 41-10 is pretty impressive. Losses, really good losses. Kansas City, oh no, wait, that's the only good loss, because as great as I think Baltimore is, these are bad losses in comparison to potential first-round bye NFL team seeding. Raiders and the Browns, both bad losses. If you were in the committee, what would you say? You'd say, okay, well, the Raiders game was really weird. Million penalties, kind of falling apart there at the end. Browns was just facing the Jameis Winston vibe fest for a week, and they caught him that week. Then somebody would be like, do you work for Baltimore in the room? Atlanta is at 6-3. Their best wins, Philadelphia, 2 against Tampa, so that's good. 2 good losses, Pittsburgh and Seattle. Wait, that's not true. Atlanta, sneaky 6-3 Atlanta. First in the NFC South. Do they get extra points for leading the division? Best win, Philadelphia. We just covered it. They've got 2 wins in the division against Tampa. Those are good wins, even though Tampa's only 4-5. The losses, not bad, really. Week 1 against Pittsburgh. They lost at home against Kansas City. And, yeah, they got dump trucked by Seattle, but Seattle's not a bad football team, so this isn't like some of these other ones that we have to compare it to. Houston hasn't been mentioned yet. They're 6-3. I really like Houston. Best win, Buffalo win, right? We've covered that one. The losses, pretty rough look against Minnesota there. A last-second field goal against Green Bay, but then they've got the Jets loss. Like, what does a Jets loss mean right now? Because if the Jets go on some kind of run, like that early non-conference team that you lose to, where you're like, I can't believe you lost those guys. And all of a sudden you're like, no, we're really good because that non-conference loss isn't that bad. Because that team ended up at 8-4. Green Bay hasn't been mentioned yet. 6-3. Best win, Houston, Arizona, the Rams. Their losses are all pretty good here. Philly, Minnesota, Detroit. You could say, well, they lost their quarterback. They were disrupted a little bit, but with Malik Willis. If they'd had losses with Willis starting, maybe their playoff ranking is higher. But in this case, they won both their games against Tennessee and the Colts when he was the main guy. Last record team worth mentioning here before we get to some of the outsiders. The Chargers, 5-3. The best win is at Denver by a score. 3 good losses, Pittsburgh, Kansas City, Arizona, maybe. And then you've got 5-4 Arizona. You've got 5-4 Denver. Yes, I probably tried to find a way to get 4-4 San Francisco in here to disrupt it a little bit, but I wasn't able to do it. All right, so here are the seedings. The 4 first-round buys. Detroit is my number 1 overall seed. Kansas City is at number 2, even with the perfect record. Some of you may have a problem with that. Some of you may admire the fact that I'm such a pioneer. Number 3, Buffalo, Philly, Minnesota, Washington. I'm doing it. I'm doing it for Baltimore because I think Baltimore is the best team in the NFL. I would lose the argument to the Detroit argument, but I do. I probably still, even as much as we touched on Goff and who he is now and that you expect really good things from him, we're past all of the unknown with Goff. I would still take Lamar over Goff. All right. So I'm going Baltimore, the 3 seed. I'll go Buffalo, 4 seed. And the only reason I didn't have Buffalo as the 3 seed here is because I just think head to head, that should have mattered, even though Baltimore has the extra loss. 5 seed, Philly or Minnesota? Philly or Minnesota? Well, Minnesota's wins, Niners, Houston, Green Bay, 3 straight weeks. That was a fun 3 weeks, huh, Minnesota? Obviously slipping a bit the last 3. Momentum-wise, I can make the argument for Philadelphia over Minnesota, but we still have to. I'm going to go with Minnesota 5, Philadelphia 6. Washington is my 7 seed. Houston is my 8 seed. Yes, the Jets' loss is about as bad as you're going to find on any of these teams that I'm looking at here. But would you allow me in the room, if we were all part of the committee, if I said, yeah, but the good Rodgers week, although they wrecked Stroud in that game. I mean, that was rough for our man CJ. All right, Green Bay's my 9 seed. Better wins than Pittsburgh. Again, we touched on the QB thing, but you couldn't use that in the room when Malik was undefeated as the starter. But I just like Green Bay's wins better than Pittsburgh. That puts Pittsburgh at 10. Atlanta, 2 wins against Tampa at 6-3. Better than Arizona's wins. Let's give it to Atlanta. Arizona's my 12 seed. Chargers, Denver, Niners, Cincinnati all out.